Olá e nossas boas-vindas a mais um episódio do Community Playbook, o seu episódio que traz aplicações reais, atuais e futuras de comunidade. Eu sou o Caio Matos, um dos hosts aqui do podcast. Hoje estou sozinho, mas com um convidado muito especial. E antes de eu apresentar o nosso convidado, eu só queria dizer que esse episódio vai ser em inglês. A gente vai provavelmente dar um jeito de colocar legendas ou alguma dublagem, mas só para avisar vocês que eu vou transferir para inglês já já. O nosso convidado de hoje já foi citado 1 milhão de vezes nesse podcast. Ele é cofundador e sócio no Together Institute, coautor do Community Canvas e do Community Weaving Framework, co-criador da Awesome Network, cofundador da Hosti e de muitas outras comunidades purpose-driven. Nosso convidado de hoje é o Fabian Pfortmüller. Hi, Fabian.
Hello.
Thanks for being with us.
Obrigado.
Well, I made like a small introduction of all your work in community, and also people that listen to this podcast know that we mention you quite often here, directly or indirectly. And we always like to start the episodes by getting to know more about our guests. And for people that don't know you, and we would like to know how community work came into your life, because at least here in Brazil, it's not like a very common career path. And I would like to, as first question, like to ask, how did you first visualize community as a career path? Why did it get your attention? And if you could tell us briefly about the projects that you have been involved on that make you the most proud, it would be great to start.
Yeah, sure. Thank you for having me. I started a community in 2007 called Sandbox. It's a community of young change makers. And I started it out of a personal need. I was a young entrepreneur and I wanted to be surrounded by other entrepreneurial young people. And I saw an opportunity to bring more of us together in a space that felt relational. And after doing this work and growing this community for several years, I realized it was kind of magical. I realized that when people were coming together, not just to network, but to build friendships, to develop a sense of trust and care, that things became possible that otherwise are not possible. So people started to be nicer to each other. People started to be more open with each other. People became more generous. People became more willing to share their resources and their connections and their ideas. And I realized I love doing this work. And I realized that it speaks to something very deep inside of me that I felt like, what if I can be surrounded by my people and have a deep sense of connections with them? And so I did this work. I did it for several years, then left to do a startup in social enterprise called Holsti. But even there, I was feeling very attracted to do community work, to bring people together. And when I left that in 2015 or so, I was asking myself, what is the most interesting question for me? And I kept coming back to community. And you asked me about my career path. Even though I was doing the work, I was not sure that this could be a career. And honestly, I think it's just grown over the last 10 years where I realized, oh yeah, okay, I can do this as a career. But I wouldn't say it was very obvious or straightforward. I just more fell into it. And I think it's one of these things where, because there's not many role models, I felt very called to do community more in the social change, social impact sector. And yeah, there were not many people where I was like, oh, that's the kind of career I want. And now I run an organization called Together Institute, together with two very close friends, Michelle Bachmann and Christine Lai. And we made this our home to do community work. Part of our work is we work with organizations like foundations, nonprofit, social impact organizations, purpose-driven organizations, to support them with their communities and networks. And part of it, we are trying to do things that we think support overall the ecosystem of community. And that can be through things like community canvas or like open source work, and by trying to convene people who do this type of work.
Amazing. Yeah. That's pretty much the path that we see on many community builders that we interview here, myself included. Like I didn't realize I was doing it, but I was, and then it's so great when we like came into this realization that okay, so this is what I love, and um this is something possible to do as work, and something that I want to also tell our viewers about one of these experiences that you've been a part of is like, if you haven't checked the host team manifesto yet, you should, and that's, I think that's very connected to the work we do as well, right? And also talking about other work that you were involved with. Well, we have mentioned you a lot. We have mentioned the community canvas a lot, and in some episodes, I believe we have mentioned the community weaving framework as well. So these are work. This frameworks are like very important for us in our work. Like. Very foundational for us, like to develop community strategy. So, um, even though community canvas is a very solid and comprehensive when it comes to community building, then recently you have also co-authored the community weaving framework, and I would like to ask you about these two frameworks. Like, did you feel like there was something missing on the community canvas that you could then address on the community weaving framework, or like do you feel like they are different things that you can apply in different moments? How do you see the difference between these two frameworks?
Yeah, great question. The community canvas came from a personal need, which is we were working with community, and this word can mean so many different things. What was our mental concept to think about community? So we started to look at patterns when we were working with different communities, and we were inspired by the business model canvas to develop something like that for community. And when it was created and we started working with it, I realized that community canvas is really good for creating clarity and for summarizing and communicating what a community was about. And yet I realized that it was missing a deeper essence. The community canvas was based on a engineering mindset. Here is a blueprint. Here, like, you just got to fill in these boxes, then you'll have a community. And I realized community, and I didn't realize that by myself. I realized that being in conversations with lots of people, with collaborators, that community is not a complicated machine. It's a living organism. It's constantly changing. It's very mysterious and alive, you know? It's a living being. It's more a rainforest than a complicated machine. So how do you take care of a rainforest? How do you nurture a rainforest? It's a very different approach than like starting with an engineering plan. So we started to ask ourselves, what would be the mindsets that we would need to go there? And we realized, first of all, we need a more nature-centric, non-linear mindset. So also the language. So we went from community building, let's build a community, kind of like an architect, constructions, engineering, to community weaving. And the other questions that became very important for us was we learned in our own work that it was relatively easy to build a community in the short term, but it's really hard to keep it healthy for long term. And I personally believe that the beauty and the transformative power of community comes from when it exists for 5 years or 50 years or 500 years. You know, the relationships, once they're there and start interwoven, so many things become possible.
Mm-hmm.
But so many people doing community work burn out.
Mm-hmm.
So many communities don't last. Why is that? And how can we design things with that in mind, that they will really last? So the question became, with the community weaving framework, how do we weave healthy communities versus how do we just build communities? And so we started looking for patterns, and we ended up in, like, I worked very closely with a beautiful group of co-creators, Erin Dixon, Sita Magnussen, Michelle Bachmann, also Alfredo Carlo and Lin Trin, who became kind of the core team. And we did many iterations, and we played with lots of different things. We got lost on the way so many times. But in the end, we kind of almost ended up with 5 essences, 5 perspectives. None of them are like, first you do this and then da, da, da. No, they're more like 5 elements to consider. And one is the fire. What is in the middle? One is the web of relationships. The other is the rhythm. One is those 3 circles, and then one is kind of the spiral as the journey of the community.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, and I still sometimes work with the community canvas just to, especially as a starting point, especially with organizations that are maybe a little bit less comfortable with complexity.
Mm-hmm.
They want simple things. They want clearly understandable things. But to go deeper into the community work, I love working with the community weaving framework, because it allows me to get to what is actually under the surface.
Amazing. Yeah, that's great. And like it's really visible, like on the language, like this complexity, nature oriented thing. And I never thought about this, like yeah, well, so sometimes the community canvas is more simple to explain, but maybe for doing the work and maintaining the community, the community weaving framework, it's better for like navigating all these different paths that the community may go. So and I would like to also go deeper in one of these essences that you mentioned, because well, we had talked a little before started recording, and I told you that I have been in an event with you like a few years back that was organized from by Mari, that is our mutual friend. And one of the things that you brought to this event that was mostly focused on gathering and events was about the rhythm, and that really stuck with me. And because of how important it felt, but also how challenging sometimes it can be to create this rhythm in the community, especially when we were talking about gatherings or events. And you also have in your blog one article about working in a very large gathering, which can be very challenging to create some kind of community in it. So I would like to ask you, for those that are unfamiliar with the community weaving framework, or with this concept, what is the rhythm on a gathering or a community, and what's its role? Why is it so important, and what a community builder or a community weaver should take into consideration to plan a good rhythm for a community?
Yeah. I think rhythm is probably one of the most important elements when I think about a healthy community. If we look at nature, if we look at how life works, things don't go in spikes and then temper out. They are regular.
Mm-hmm.
And the question, and I think we as humans have known that for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
If you look at many religions learned the importance of ritual, of repetition. If you're in the Christian religion, you go to church on Sunday mornings.
Mm-hmm.
And it's always on Sunday mornings. It's not sometimes on a Monday and then another time is maybe on a Wednesday. No, it's on Sunday mornings. Why is that? Because I think rhythm gives us stability.
Mm-hmm.
It gives us something to form our life around. And it also gives us a trust that this will be there for a long, long time.
Mm-hmm.
And I love this quote that comes from Anthony Cabral. He once said at a conference, community is like a muscle that grows when we practice together.
Mm-hmm.
So imagine that community is like a muscle that every time we come together as a group, it grows a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just an individual muscle. I think that's actually also true, but it's a shared muscle where we know better how to be as a group. We know better how to talk to each other. We know how better what our values are. We know how better how to do our rituals every time we go. And after a while, that muscle is really strong that I know, okay, if I go to a creative mornings, it will start this way and it will end this way and it will have this kind of flavor. But the first few times people didn't know because it was fresh, right? There was not this collective muscle.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think the same really applies for communities in general, that we just need to find out what is that rhythm.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the question there is again for me around healthy. What is a healthy rhythm for our group? Because some groups, they have so much energy and there's so much critical mass. They need to meet once a week.
Mm-hmm.
But for most groups, that will not be healthy. I think there's always at the beginning, there's this like initial energy, you know, everyone wants to like get together all the time. Let's make all these subgroups. Let's like do a lot of meetings, but it tempers out.
Mm-hmm.
And so what is a kind of rhythm we can sustain? Me as a community weaver, I often ask myself, what is a rhythm I can sustain for the next 10 years?
Mm-hmm.
Probably not a very high frequency. And more recently, I've also been asking myself, what are seasons in the rhythm? Does it always have to be the same? Because if you look at nature, it runs in cycles and seasonalities where there's maybe a season of rest, maybe there's a season of sprints. So I'm also curious how that can show up in kind of a cycle of a community. Yeah, I don't know. Is there any other curiosities around that come up for you?
No, but as you were talking, I was thinking about like I really like this analogy with the muscle, and I think it's very interesting about what you were saying. Like there's this collective muscle. You use creative mornings as an example. Like a person will go there for the first time, and that happens for any community. It's not gonna know how it's gonna go, but once you've been a while, then you know how it starts, you know how it ends. And what I was thinking that's very interesting about that is that when this collective muscle is built, maybe an individual that has not developed this muscle yet can also benefit from it as soon as this person joins the community, because the other people are going to be around to guide them or help them. And I think that's very beautiful and a very important part of community work. So
Absolutely. And I've seen that also play out when, for example, if the community spreads to different places.
mm-hmm.
Let's say someone was part of the chapter here in Sao Paulo and they experienced it for like 3-4 years and it really became part of that muscle.
Mm-hmm.
They can actually transfer it onwards they go to a new place. They kind of know how it works.
Yes.
And they will bring others into it. And so you can like travel like that. It's almost like oral knowledge or implicit knowledge that like is there in the community. We saw that a lot in Sandbox where, for example, one of the main formats in Sandbox was always like doing potluck dinners where people come together, bring food, have a nice, very informal dinner. And it just became kind of how we do things. And so people who got used to it and moved to a new place, they would know how to do it there too, because they felt safe, they felt confident in doing it the sandbox way.
Yes, and that's really amazing to think about, because that also helps with one of the things that I think can be more challenging for communities, that scaling, right?
Yeah.
Because if you give up some control and you don't want to centralize everything, having these people that are part of the larger community and go somewhere else, they can help make this community builder, bring more people together, and maybe even develop new stuff that you can bring back to the core later. So yeah,
Absolutely.
that's very interesting. Yes.
And if I may add one thing to that, is like, I think also a lot about, when I think about healthy rhythm, I also think a lot about what are cheap and simple and repeatable formats. I think we sometimes, as community weavers, we love designing beautiful experiences for people, which is
Yes.
nice. And I also think about, okay, if we want to sustain this rhythm, and if we want others to sustain this rhythm and replicate it in other places, how can we create formats that are really, really simple? Again, to the example of like with Sandbox, to this day, I think one of the most important templates is we're going to have dinner together and everyone is going to bring dinner to the same place to share it. Very simple, very, very easy to organize, cheap to organize, and therefore it becomes easier to replicate and easier to sustain over long periods of time. And sometimes I have found myself being too excited to do too complicated things. Because, experience design, it's awesome to create beautiful things. And I would say, I think there's a role for, I call them anchor experiences or like peak experiences. Like you do something special where you get a really special emotional experience, but maybe that's once a year. Or maybe that's every 6 months. I don't know, but it doesn't have to be every single time.
Yes. Sometimes the simple is better,
Mm-hmm.
and sometimes even people can like deal with it better. Maybe they're not ready for like some very large, complicated, or elaborate experience. Of course, it's nice to have them. Is very exciting. It's exciting to plan them, but yeah, if we have to choose between taking a lot of time and maybe lose the rhythm because we're planning a very elaborate experience, and we could do something simple to keep the people together and bring them, that's always the best option.
100%. And small gatherings, I think, are easier to, many people feel safer in small gatherings and feel easier to connect with people. Large gathering also, they're easier for introverted people, extroverted people. They're harder for people who are maybe less comfortable in crowds, and for more
Yes.
introverted people. So in general, I think small events are just, they're easier to make build deeper relationships in.
Yes. Amazing. Well, going to the next question. I believe that we, in our work, as community builders, are in like very different places. I believe here at the podcast we mostly bring brand communities, enterprise communities, even though sometimes we bring some organic communities that has also grown to be something else. And as you were saying, you work mostly with purpose driven and social change communities. And there was another thing that got stuck with me in this event that we were together, is that, at least back then, you were a little skeptic of communities that were built by brands or communities. And there was also one particular post on your blog that I mentioned here quite often because I agree with it. I don't know if you're gonna remember that, but it was something that you were to the market and there was like a lettuce, and there was
Yeah.
join our community, and who's gonna join a community of lettuce? That doesn't make any sense. So in the last few years, community has become a buzzword for corporations in marketing specifically, and that caused many of them to try to build communities even when that didn't make any sense. And coming back to today, this current scenario, and you can give me your honest opinion. How do you feel about enterprise communities today? And if you would give an advice for brands that want to build a community, a real one, a healthy community, what should they take into consideration to make it relevant for people?
Yeah, it's we were talking about this a little bit before, and it's important for me to spend more time thinking about this. I don't spend enough time thinking about the corporate side of communities. Big picture is my way of how I observe the world is that we're in a time of deep isolation and disconnection and loneliness.
Mm-hmm.
And I see a beautiful, incredibly big opportunity for us as humans to come more into relationship again.
Mm-hmm.
And to come into a sense of togetherness and care and mutuality and collective action.
Mm-hmm.
For me, that's the big picture. That's like there's such a need and such an opportunity around that. And now the question is, how do we as the collective, as humans, go about creating those environments of relationality and community for each other?
Mm-hmm.
And I worry that when you create community for someone, you are providing something really precious and almost something very fragile and something very beautiful to a human being.
Mm-hmm.
You help them to feel less lonely, you give them a sense of belonging. And there's a power and responsibility in doing that.
Mm-hmm.
And my worry sometimes is if there's corporate interest that might be driven by market share or by their stock price or in the end by capitalism,
Mm-hmm.
is that they might not do that with integrity.
Mm-hmm.
And what does it mean for us as humans if we let corporations provide us with one of the most important elements in the world, which is relationships?
Mm-hmm.
I worry about that because I think our current system does not optimize, the capitalistic system does not optimize for the well-being of life and of all humans. It optimizes for, profit.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say to organizations, if they do community, my invitation is to do it with integrity.
Mm-hmm.
And to see that what they're doing is kind of providing something fundamental to human beings.
Mm-hmm.
Why I do see an opportunity, and maybe why I should be more open to it, is I think one of the biggest challenges in the big picture we have right now is that nobody is willing to invest money into community.
Yes.
And I'm fortunate to get to meet and interact with community weavers all over the world.
Mm-hmm.
And I see a world that is full of people who are incredibly talented at community weaving. People don't need our frameworks. People don't need things. People have it inside of them. We humans know how to create community. And most of us cannot make a living doing this.
Mm-hmm.
So it happens as a side thing, as a volunteer thing, or we find ways to do it for organizations and corporations. And I'm trying to figure out, okay, how can we change that? And if brands, if organizations are willing to pay for it because they see it leads them to brand retention or to, customer service, like to reduce costs through customer service or whatnot, I'm open to that.
Mm-hmm.
maybe it does support that, but I think it doesn't. I doesn't think the skeptical part of me feels like it doesn't fulfill the bigger structural hole we have in humanity, where we need to invest on a massive scale into community. And I think that will never come from brands and companies. I think that will come when governments will put money into this. When our cities will say, in order to be a healthy, flourishing human being in Sao Paulo, we need a community weaver in every neighborhood, on every block, and we want to invest into community weavers for climate change and for every industry, where we just like can connect all those elements. I think that's what's needed to transform the world we're in right now. Maybe the companies can play, they do play a role, like the example you shared with that marketer conference that became kind of a close-knit community. That's beautiful. And part of me is also like, how could that not be? Why does it need a company that in the end of the day wants to sell something to these people to provide that human good? It's almost like a human right, to have relationships and to have care in our lives. I dream of a world and I work in service of a future where all of us get it. And I think we need to unlock bigger pots of resources that are not just marketing budgets that will move at any moment. Because I also don't believe that there is a long-term patience with brands. I think something will change. The hype cycle of, you mentioned, community is kind of trendy, but it goes up and down. The marketing budgets, they float. Leadership changes. Their stock price changes and whatnot. So I'm skeptical if there's long-term investment, if it's a reliable source of energy for community.
Yes. I pretty much agree with your vision. And I would think that it would be really interesting if we had that more bottom up and or government provided. I have actually read a little bit about, there are some experiments in Europe, at least, that some cities, they are organizing like citizens assemblies, and like this is some kind of community that has some on a much more citizenship approach. Um, and yes, I do believe every time we say that a lot here in this podcast, that when companies want to work with community, they need to be patient, because it's not going to bring any results in like 3 months. It's gonna take a while. They can't think that they're gonna own the community. So we believe, like as you mentioned before, when we were talking about the community weaving framework, we believe that the community is a living thing, and that the community pretty much already exists. Like there are these people that has this these things in common, and once we get them together, they're gonna stick together, even if we like dissolve whatever structure we have built for them. So I'd like to think that companies and brands need to think of acting in community as if they were a person that may be a facilitator, that may be a provider of some resources, but not as the owner of the community, not someone who's going to dictate where the community is going to go, what the community is going to do. Of course, providing structure for a community to bond is very important, but I believe that the companies need to act like they were another member of the community and someone that's coming together because they also have this interest in this thing that's gonna work. So yeah, I do believe that they have to do it with integrity and with long-term thinking, but also they need to know that they don't own and they don't control the community. So yeah, that's how I like to look at it. Okay, so moving to the next question. And you also mentioned a little bit in this last answer about how we're feeling some disconnection, like people feeling the need to come together. So there's lots of things going on, like all still some post-pandemic trauma, loneliness epidemic. Since last year, people have been talking a lot about social health, which has become a very important topic and a very important discussion that I think we need to have. And I don't know, we have like all these things, all these effects of social media algorithms and now AI and like AI coming together in a social network only for AI bots, which is crazy. And I think that all of that impacts our work as community weavers or community builders, and also affects the way that people develop relationships to each other. And considering all of that and taking all of this into consideration, how do you think like this affects and will affect our work as community weavers, and um, how can we better navigate, and how do you see the future of community building?
Hmm. Yeah, my intuition is that there is two tracks. The current track is things gonna go faster, more technology, more AI, um, and more digital.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the track we're on, and it's accelerating. And I think it leads to further isolation. It pretends that it connects, but it actually doesn't, as we have seen with social media in so many cases.
Yes.
And I think there is a growing awareness that we need to change course.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there's an opportunity for a second track that will start to emerge.
Mm-hmm.
And the second track will be it will be more offline, more local,
Mm-hmm.
small, self-organized, and it will focus again on the fundamentals of human relationships, of care, friendship, love, neighbors, getting together and just be together.
Mm-hmm.
Now this is like me being this is the future I want to be in support of.
Mm-hmm.
And I do feel that I think the hunger for offline, for slower, for more spacious is growing.
Mm-hmm.
And when is the pain of disconnection and of this fast pace and hustle, when is big enough that we actually start to change our behaviors? And I think there's already I can feel seeds. I can feel little glimpses of that future starting to emerge, where people are just
Mm-hmm.
like, I need a different kind of way of coming together. I need to have away from my phone. I just need to be with my neighbors and make food together.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where I think is the most exciting part.
Yes.
I think the other path will continue, because that's where the money's at. That's where innovation is at, the
Mm-hmm.
traditional form of innovation. But I think we as human beings need to reclaim ourselves and our sense of shared future. And a big part of that is we'll have to recreate community, and we have to I think it will happen in a hyper local, decentralized way, how we always have done it. We've come together
Mm-hmm.
and sat around the fire, and we've been with our neighbors, and I think it's time to bring that back. And we'll need some experiments now and see what works, and we'll have to find ways to take care of these community people so that they don't have to do everything as pro bono and volunteer.
Mm-hmm.
Those are the experiments, I think, that will allow us to come into healthy relationships. For me, like when I think about the world, I see everything as relationships.
Mm-hmm.
And I think right now, we as humans are not in healthy relationships with each other.
Mm-hmm.
We're not in healthy relationships with nature. We're not in healthy relationships with, the climate, with other animals. It just, something is off with the relationships.
Yes.
It's extractive, it's competitive.
Mm-hmm.
And the biggest opportunity of this lifetime is to try to find out what does it mean to be in healthy relationships,
Yes. Yes. I have thought about this a lot, and the future you described is the one that I'm aiming for as well. Um, but I have been feeling, and this is something that I share in the group that we were on Sunday.
Yep.
In the smaller group, that I think that in order, like, because of um, all of this disconnection and competition and all of that you have just described, that's derived from the system that we're living in. um I believe that's gonna take some of us to, like, trick people into community. I don't know if you agree with that, but sometimes it's hard to, like, bring people together. I don't know if you also feel like there's some resistance on these people, like, and again, I believe that this derives from this disconnection, competition, disbelief on each other, that is really off on these relationships. And I believe that, I don't know, it's gonna take some of us to, like, create something that to, like, not like inviting people to community directly, but maybe creating something to, like, make them see the value of this again and, like, be for it again. I don't know what's your thoughts on this.
Yeah, it's a great question and curiosity. I know exactly what you mean when you feel like, it's hard to get people into community at times. One thing I observe in many communities, that just nobody has time for anything, right?
Yes.
Time is like the biggest scarcity right now.
Yes.
People want it, but we're deep in this race to survive and take care of
Mm-hmm.
ourselves, and we want to be healthy, and we want to have a good romantic relationship, and we want to have a good job, and it's overwhelming. So
Mm-hmm.
I understand, and how to get out of that. I hope, and I want my work, I want to be in service of people like you. I want to be in service of people who have the beautiful core of community inside of them, and see how can we enable you to just create a true sense of community wherever you are, whoever your people are, and see, can these experiments then slowly grow?
Mm-hmm.
Can they be little seeds, little seeds of care, of love, of relationship, that maybe in the future become a culture of care?
Mm-hmm.
And I wonder, if in the next 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, things will start to crumble so much that right now community is a nice to have.
Mm-hmm.
People want it, but they don't need it.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe things get worse if the climate becomes more fragile, if our geopolitical situation becomes more fragile, if the economy becomes more fragile, if we become even live in this, like, AI utopia or dystopia. Maybe community will be something we need,
Mm-hmm.
as it used to be all the time. The problem is
Yes.
right now we feel like we don't need it to survive. We just want it,
Mm-hmm.
but maybe at some point we'll need it.
Yeah.
And then I think that will unlock a different type of energy, maybe.
Yes. 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 I think that, yeah, I'm really going away from my script here, but that's
Welcome.
very interesting. Yeah. Because, yeah, I have thought a lot about this. Like, we live, like, in this convenience culture, and I believe that some people have come into an illusion of autosufficiency, like they don't need each other, they don't need other people. And because of like this world today that you can get anything in a tap in your screen or a click of a button, it makes sometimes you don't see all the people that are involved in this process. And I think that makes the disconnection and isolation worse. And it's funny because I also believe that in some ways that's a bubble, because when we look into poorer neighborhoods in Brazil, for example, I do believe that they have a very stronger sense of community and are more connected to their neighbors and people that live around them because they need to. And I guess that in a middle class bubble or something like that, because we have more resources, sometimes we do believe that we don't need anyone else, and we are supposed to be autosufficient, and that's a lie. That's an illusion.
Yeah. I I I I think there's a really, really important question there, and I want to spend the next years to really understand all of this. I think that you're so right that I think some of the people who can afford it, I think we started to replace things that were done through community, through people around us, through services we pay
Yes.
for, we get our food by paying someone else to make food for us. We give our children to someone who takes care of our children. There's so many elements that we could do for each other,
Hmm.
and it would have a different quality.
Yes.
Um, and and I think that's capitalism. Capitalism want has is look. I'm not an expert on capitalism, but the way I perceive it is that it's like this hungry beast that looks for more and more things that it can like commoditize and
Hmm.
serve to us, as something we should consume. And how do we get out of that? I don't know. We need to reconnect to. I think we don't talk enough in the community space about love.
Yes.
And I think the underlying energy, I think love is the transformative force of the universe.
Hmm.
And it's strange to use a word like love in a professional context. We talked about how to make a career as a community weaver. If I use the word love, I will never get paid for my work ever, right?
You're right.
And yet we know that we need each other, and we have each other. There's something there, right? That's like doesn't connect. And
Hmm.
yet there is this enormous force. Um, and how do we it will need translators like you who can like translate that like deep force of beauty and care and love to translate it into this like real world, and it will need invitations to bring to people to reconnect to that. I have no idea how, but I know in my gut that that is how we get out of this mess, you know.
Yes. 100%. 100% with you. Yeah. Going back to my script and
Yeah.
also taking this
Let's
this
go. Let's go.
moment.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I do believe that this is connected because I want to hear about good examples. Like when it comes to community weaving, what are your greatest inspirations? Like where do you look for to I don't know, to inspire yourself as a community weaver? Where would you recommend us to look for great examples of healthy communities? And if you could give an advice for other community weavers or community builders, what would it be?
Hmm. Yeah, I am. Well, is this a real plan, or is it real or is it fake? I don't
I
know.
hope it's real.
If it's real, I think this might be our. Is it?
Real.
Oh, good, awesome. I think this is our greatest teacher. Is like life. Life has figured out how to sustain and to flourish,
Uh-huh.
and my sense is I need to observe life more and see how it really operates,
Mm-hmm.
you know? Um, how is life flourishing on this planet? I feel like that's how we can learn about how community really works.
Mm-hmm.
The rainforest is in relationship, and it finds a way to be in a healthy relationship somehow. And I think I don't know, I think there's so much we can learn from the indigenous cultures across the world who
Mm-hmm.
have found other ways of being in relationship with the land and with the beings around us. I think we can learn from complexity theories. That's where my curiosities are right now.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I think we can learn from how. I think we can go back to how we used to do community. I think a lot of community has to do with remembering versus inventing.
Yes.
Like I look at the Brazilian people and I'm like, the way you all come together and they're all the seeds, all the wisdom is there. We just have to kind of reconnect to it.
Mm-hmm.
How did our ancestors do this? How did our grandparents come together in community?
Mm-hmm.
Like, what is the meaning of carnival, and like what does it do for community? So those are some of, like, I feel like, for me, my biggest inspirations. And yeah, and the other thing that came to my mind as I was listening to your question was, I'm also really inspired by community. I think a lot about values,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm very inspired by communities that are able to live in values that are more beautiful and more inviting than the norm.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I'm part of a little, like, co-working community in Amsterdam called Post Office, and it has a very beautiful set of values of, like, self-independence and agency,
Mm-hmm.
and there's one person that really started it. His name is Brian Wolf, and I've just been sitting there and watching him role model and be those values. And for me, those are really inspiring moments of learning.
Amazing. Okay, so coming to the end of our chat, which makes me really sad because I would sit here for like other 3 hours talking to you. There's also one question that we always like to ask our guests, and that is, throughout your career or your community experience in general, what would you say is the biggest lesson that you've learned?
Maybe inspired by the conversation we had today, I would say I would invite the community weavers, if they listen to this, to reconnect to what do they think is the deepest essence of this work.
Mm-hmm.
And it's so easy to forget that. I forget it all the time.
Mm-hmm.
For me, the deepest essence of this work is relationships, care, love. And how can I remember that again and again and again, that is what, at least for me, this work is about.
Mm-hmm.
And very, very connected to that is, for me, the question of health. How do we, as community weavers, make sure we stay healthy? Um, because I see so many community weavers burn out doing this type of work. And I think it's very important that we talk more about money, that we talk more about livelihoods, that we talk more about, Kai, are you okay? Can you, like, do you make enough money with this? Are you hustling? Is, like, how do we make sure that this is not just like some kind of burnout cycle that lots of people go through, but that we can sustain the people who do this type of work.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, and I would invite people just to have more conversations about that. And because if we cannot sustain this work, like, how will it ever become something more present in society?
Mm-hmm.
So that would be my invitation and my curiosity.
Amazing. Great. Well, I'm very happy to have had this conversation. Very happy that you're here. Thank you a lot for being available and having the time to come talk to us here. And just for the end, I don't know if you wanna make some closing remarks, if you want to leave a last message, or if people want to reach out to you and talk about community, where can they find you?
Yeah, thank you. Well, first of all, thank you for this really nice conversation and this nice invitation. It's nice just to have time to talk about this. I'm one of the co-creator of a community and network called Wasan, and maybe we can link to it in the show notes.
Sure.
And it's basically trying to bring together people who want to build purpose-driven communities or networks or ecosystems. And every month we have, or almost every month, we have a virtual kind of learning call. So if people are interested in chatting with others and learning more, they should just sign up on our website and then they get the invitations. And I'm trying to write more, and I really enjoy writing, but I also get scared of writing all the time. So if people are interested in reading more, maybe we can link to a Substack where I'm writing.
Amazing. Sure, we're gonna do that.
Thanks.
Okay, thank you again for being with us, and for you that has been watching us until now. Recommend this episode for your friends so they can learn more about community with Fabian, and give us the thumbs up and 5 stars on Spotify or whatever you're listening, and maybe you can leave on the comments for us like what are you doing or what can you do to bring more people together or create healthy communities. Thank you a lot for being with us, and we'll see you on the next episode. Bye bye.